So on your right, there is this Andriette. She has come from South Africa, and just to let you all know that she has been running APC for the last 17-18 years. Now she has handed over to the team, and she has been on Internet Governance Forum MAG group. MAG is multi-stakeholder. What is it? Advisory group. So Andriette has been involved with internet for the last 30-40 years. What do you use internet related to all that? Asking questions, accountability. She has been at that level of things. So she is be very kind to come here to meet all of you. After the meeting, she will be available next 2 days. Please don't leave her alone and ask lots of questions. How come internet has become only five? It's a terrible place, but how? You have Mr. Rajiv Kumar here, who was Niti Ayog's vice chairperson, and therefore, abhi nahi hai, so you can ask any question with him. Okay, so so he is going to take a lot of. There are a lot of people who listen to him in terms of policy, regulation, and all that. So he had been very kind enough to say. He said that I don't want to be on the panel because I am coming to learn, but we wanted to take advantage of his presence. On my left, Sonia. Many of you know Sonia. For the last 3 years, she has been very kind enough to, come for DCS. And Sonia runs an organization called GDIP, Global Digital Initiative Partners. And there are about 50 plus members to that organization all over the world. So she will bring her through her all the insights from the global. And we have Vandana here, Vandana Vasudevan. The reason why she is here is because she has written a book called क्या लिखा है इस पे? OTP, please. Do you anyone who is here who has not used OTP for something? And everybody who has used OTP, please raise your hand. Okay, so your life is incomplete without OTP, right? So Vandana is going to give us some perspective that how data and accountability and the platform people are collecting data, and we all are only accessing through OTP. So here is the panel. We will make it interactive, and we will also come back to you to ask a few questions. I will start with Andriette because she is also my guru in terms of teaching, how to run organizations with internet focus. So the first question to you is that the topic itself, people, platform, and accountability. The biggest change from late 90s to now is that we have no internet. We have only access to few platforms, and a lot of platforms are coming. Is the world going to be like this, that we will have to live our life through platforms?
Osama takes this let's talk accountability very seriously. I think he interprets it as make your panelists accountable and invite the audience to hold them accountable. I think it's a really difficult question to answer, Osama. And there was a British economist very long ago, a woman called Joan Robinson, who wasn't a Marxist, but she was influenced by Marxism. And she used to say that the only thing worse than being exploited by capitalism is not being exploited by capitalism. And she said this at a time when there was massive unemployment, when automation in industrial processes started putting people out of jobs. And, speaking as a South African, the country with the highest unemployment in the world. And in a way, I think that's true about the internet. The only thing worse than not having your data exploited and not being part of this platformization is being excluded by it, because digital is so pervasive at the moment in public services, in the workplace, in access to education, that not having access is sometimes worse than having access, even though access comes with all of this baggage. So I think, is it inevitable? I think no. I think injustice is never inevitable. And I think that's the challenge for a space like this, made up of people from government and from academia, from civil society, from the innovation sector. We have to challenge that. There are alternatives. And I think that's the depressing moment we are in, is that I think we are almost giving up on thinking it can be done differently. And I think that's the challenge, that's the trap we must not fall into, that it is possible to have, just listen to the initiatives we heard about, from our opening speaker, public sector initiatives that are creating empowerment, that's creating benefit. And in a way, Osama, maybe I'll end on that. I think if we think of just the global level, and if we think of the global platforms, if we think of the power, the kind of impenetrable power of Google, of Meta, it feels impossible to change this, and particularly AI, how that's being rolled out as well. But if we think of it in a more localized, more tangible level, if we think of traffic challenges in Hyderabad, if we think of specific communities, digital artisans in India, then I think we can find ways of taking advantage of the power of digitalization, but rolling it out, using norms, using rights protections, using the interest and protecting the interest of the people that are impacted by how we roll out these solutions. And I think that's often, we underestimate, I think, the power of the local, and we underestimate the power of the national, and extrapolating from that, I think we underestimate the power of the global south. And you see that often actually in some of the global initiatives and the global advocacy processes. If global south countries come together in the same way then if local communities, such through community networks, come together, it is possible to not fall victim to this monolith, this hegemoth of platformization. But we have to make it tangible, and we have to do it from the local outwards.
Thank you. I'll come back to you because we'll make several rounds, and therefore I will also request all the speakers to be short and precise so that we can tackle more and more topics. I'll come to Sonia. Sonia, you have been here, and many times, the Indian conditions, situation. Your GDIP has members from all over the world, also in Southeast Asia and South Asia. But your focus has been mostly access, affordable access, meaningful connectivity. But as soon as we get those meaningful connectivity, we get data fight. As soon as we have access, but we also have a understanding that people who are not even connected, their data is being already collected, even though they are not connected. So, how do you see from the perspective of digital as a public infrastructure, digital as the necessary infrastructure, and yet people's privacy and their identity and everything is safeguarded?
Thank you. And thank you for having me here again. It's always a pleasure to be here at DCS and in Hyderabad. So that's a great question, Osama. And I think, well, Andriette already mentioned quite a few important points here when it comes to these. But when it comes to access and meaningful access, as you were mentioning, you can't disassociate that with what we like to call a rights-based framework to thinking about digital inclusion. And so if you start with that, you start realizing that when we have greater connectivity and greater opportunity to be connected, we also, first of all, have to remember that our rights as human beings not only have to be respected in that space, but we as users, as digital citizens, as the Digital Citizen Summit very much highlights, we need to also own the responsibility of having the skills and the knowledge to be the kind of users, the kind of participants in a digital space that are informed, that understand what it means to come online, that have the skills to be able to use any kind of platform in a safe, in a private way, in a way that protects our own data. And so when you start thinking about that, and this is kind of a way of looking at meaningful access that it's a bit more holistic, it's not just thinking about the technology, the access, which we all want to be connected. And if we don't, we feel, and we are excluded indeed, as our colleague already said. But it also comes with a responsibility. So it's the duty and the responsibility at the same time that I think is also important to mention. And that means that governments, private sector, civil society, all of us here in this space have a responsibility to ensure that as we engage in digital spaces that are evolving and evolving in different ways, that we think about those duties and responsibilities at the same time, that we don't disassociate them from the experience of being a digital citizen. If we do that, then we give each of us individually and collectively agency to determine on how we engage with technology. How do we shape the kind of use that we want to have? And I think that's really, really critical, to this event and to a lot of the discussions that are happening. It starts with how we want to use, how do we want to be part of a digital society? And how do we want to shape it? How do you, each of you as individuals, as a community, as organizations, what is it that you want to see in this digital society? And what actions can you take to shape that society? So back to your question, when you think about meaningful access, I don't just think, or we don't think at GDIP and our partners, we're not just thinking about the infrastructure, we're not just thinking about affordable access, we are thinking about all of those issues. We're thinking about the reliability, the quality of the connection, but we don't disassociate that with a social environment that is supportive, that is right respecting, that ensures that people have the right skills to use and to be in that environment in a way that is safe for them, but most importantly, that it gives them agency to decide the kind of use they want to have. So I hope that makes sense. We can come back to it again, but it's about understanding meaningful access from those perspectives, not just the infrastructure side, but also from the right side and the duty as we come into technology, what we as individuals have to be responsible for as well.
Wonderful. Just for I have a very good example in India about meaningful access. We have on record, we have India's rural population is 910 million, which is 91 crores. So out of that, there are 450 million people have smartphones. In rural India is inclusive, and 350 or something is in rural India. However, all the transaction that was recorded, that took place, online transaction, is 350 million for the whole country. But for rural India, it is 122 million. So that means out of 910 million people, only 122 million people did online transaction. And out of that, 6% of those 122 million did 45% of all transactions. That means rest of the people did transaction like once or twice somewhere. So in totality, not more than 10% of 900 million people do online transaction on a regular basis. And online transaction I'm taking as a meaningful connectivity benchmark. Because you can do payment, you can watch video, the network is stable, you have a smartphone, you have a working phone. So this is the disparity that we have between what it looks like that, TRAI claims 1.1 billion people in India are, internet connected, which is not wrong. So just having connectivity is not enough. But just having connectivity certainly is enough to collect your data. Your data is already there. So this is the perspective that we wanted to give you. But I'll come to Vandana. You have traveled around Asia. You have documented huge amount of things in your book. But in general, what trend are you seeing? If we are, as you can see the topic, we are people, platform, and all the gig workers are platform oriented, and all the consumers use that platform. Where are you seeing we are going?
Okay. Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's working.
Okay. So thank you for having me here. I'm talking from the perspective of the app-based economy, the digital economy that we are all part of now. Okay, that has become like inevitable and ubiquitous, and we can't live without it. So in this digital economy, there's the customers, there are workers, there are small sellers and small restaurants, and tying them all together is this tech platform, the app company, right? I see this as a interplay of three P's: privilege, power, and precarity. So privilege rests with people like us who are the digital consumers, who are the, not really digital citizens. In this, we are consumers in the digital economy. So privilege rests with us because just with a few taps of the phone, we are able to summon anything to our doorstep. And we don't even have to search for cash. We just flash our phone, we pay through UPI. So this was a privilege that not even, about a decade ago was so prevalent. You had to go out, get a cab, you had to go to a restaurant to eat, but now everything comes to our doorstep. And supporting that are thousands of gig workers and small sellers who are also behind this whole digital dazzle that we see. Let's come to the second P, which is power. Power rests almost completely with the tech platform. And why is that? Because we live in an age where information is power, and the tech platform has all the information about consumers and also about sellers and about workers. So for consumers, for instance, the food delivery platform that you use knows what you bought, where you bought it from, and when you bought it. So you might have got these nudges on your phone, these notifications which say, you bought an ice cream last Sunday. It's hot. Would you like an ice cream today? What is this? This is nudge marketing. Because previously, before these apps were there, if you bought an ice cream, nobody would know. Somebody is recording it, knows when and how and where, and is pushing you to buy again. This is the information that the platform has about consumers. The platform also knows everything about the worker once he logs in, where he is at any point in time and why he must, where he should go next, how fast he delivered whatever to the previous customer. And on this basis, his whole day's schedule is decided. So you could say that this is not a problem. I mean, you signed up for this, so the algorithm decides what you should do next, and that's the model, which is great, except that the worker, with so much control exercised on the worker is not an employee of the platform. The worker is treated as an independent contractor, so therefore doesn't have the social security that comes with being an employee of a company. So the independent contractor, on the other hand, is something like our plumber and our carpenter, who can decide which customer they want to serve, at what price, and when. They'll say, abhi nahi aana, madam, abhi busy, I'm kal aayenge. But this gig worker doesn't have that freedom. Is completely controlled by an opaque algorithm which he doesn't understand, which tells him, okay, go now to this place. And if it's, for example, for an Uber driver, it decides the price, it decides whom you have to serve and when. And there are penalties for refusing to do that. So all the power rests with the tech platform. Some amount of power also rests with us as customers when we rate workers. We get upset about something and we just put like a 2 on 5. But the platform is noticing that and saying, why did you get to 2 on 5? This customer was unhappy. And there's a high chance that the ID of the worker gets blocked, which means that he cannot do business on that platform until it is released. So there's power and there is privilege, which we have as consumers, and there is precarity, which is held by all these thousands of workers and small sellers and small restaurants, which are powering this whole digital economy. So for sellers, let me give you one example. Sellers who clamber onto the big retail platforms like Amazon don't really know what they get into. They almost get into it in FOMO, like if I'm not there, then maybe my competitor will gain. And they think that their customer base is going to miraculously improve, but that's not what happens, because to be seen in the listing, there is some payment that you have to do. There is advertising. There are levies that Amazon puts on them, which they completely don't understand. And when they do the math, some of the brave ones who have opted out of it have found that it doesn't really add up. Their customer base didn't really go so much beyond, and they're totally controlled by the platform and its algorithm and its system of functioning, which they don't understand. So power, privilege, and precarity is how I see the digital economy as.
So that means people are at stake. Because you said that the power is with the platform, completely at the platform, and there is hardly any transparency. There is hardly any sharing of data.
It's completely opaque, the algorithm. So the worker doesn't understand, why suddenly his ID got blocked. A lot of unilateral decisions are taken. And the small seller doesn't understand why, his despite him listing on Amazon, why the business didn't grow. And so these things are opaque, and it's also completely, it's concentrated. The power and the knowledge and the information is concentrated with the platform, while the others are still trying to understand.
Thank you. I'll come to you to give you, what is happening with platform is that all the platforms come to us from the perspective of servicing you, convenience, and that's our purpose. It's a very pious purpose. With all the corporate people come, hardly any common people come with platform. Only corporate come with this pious intention of providing platform to serve you and not let you know what data we have collected about you. So this whole part, even government is now adopting platformization. For example, NREGA workers have been asked to make their attendance on a platform. And if you don't do, you don't get your wages. So this combination of technology and convenience and service and making it a part of regulation and policy is where we are seeing is the techno-driven policy that is taking place. How, since you have been in a position and situation of being concerned about planning for the whole nation, for the people, how do you see this entire thing coming up, and what kind of challenges it is throwing, and how do we really protect people and safeguard people, because in a democratic ecosystem, people are the most important. That's it.
Thanks, Osama. Can you hear? You can use this. Use this. Use this. Use this.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me here. It's wonderful, and as I said, I came here as a learner. I remain that. And the question that what I've just heard and what I've been thinking about is that for me, the sort of biggest risk, if you like, is the complete depersonalization of a society, and which is what we are getting toward through this techno policy, which is that whether you're ordering things or the gig worker or the small restaurant owner or the trader, there is no connection at all now between the supplier and the demander, and the people who are consuming it. And the result is that and then for techno policy, etc., the same thing can be extended then to the people and the government. that if you have a techno policy, a techno-driven policy, the platformization of the policy, the connection between the people and the people who are supposed to represent their interest, the government, will be lost. And therefore, as a result, because there was a lack of, I don't know what to call it, but increasing opacity, the accountability is going to go away. Now, for example, I mean, just to take a small example, is that when you order food on a platform, when you get that, you get it and you are just sort of a passive recipient. There's no such thing as giving a feedback to the person who is actually providing it. The best you can do is to provide the feedback to the platform, who may or may not provide this to the concerned person. So for me, the risk is that there will be a disconnect, a growing disconnect between the people who think they're getting convenience, but at the same time are being objectified, in a very strong manner, and that could lead to a situation where there is no relationship between different stakeholders of the society. And if that happens as a result of the platformization, that would be a real pity. Because the opposite can also be done through digitalization, which is that increasing connectivity among the people can be used to create a much greater interaction between people who can then have their own agency and interact with each other. But the platform intervenes to prevent that. And how do we change that? How do we I think the only way would be to break the monopoly of the platforms in some sections, some areas. How do we achieve that? Again, is I'm not clear in my mind as to how you'll do that. But again, I think your effort at hyper local thing, maybe at that level, people can use digitization for better and more enriched information exchange amongst each other, rather than being mediated through certain agencies, through certain instruments or intermediaries who can control and sort of transform that information in the way that suits them and not the people who are sort of actually providing the data. The last thing is that this increasing amount of data collection about our own lives, etc., could mean that you could be, in some sense, the a very sort of how do I a sort of mechanical, extension of some opaque body sitting there, because they would, all this data collection. What I'm saying is that at the end of the day, you could actually lose your own choice, because you will be so persuaded by all the people that in all the agencies that have got there, whether it's the government or the corporates, etc., that your independence, your autonomy, your behavior as an individual could actually become a thing of the past, because you could just be a sort of driven, as it were, by people whom you don't know. Let me end here.
So I was talking to since we work with a lot of artisans and weavers and people in the villages, which traditional wisdom, although they are called laborers, but with traditional wisdom. And we were talking to some people that why don't you go on Instagram and all that, and they said no, I don't want to go to Instagram, because if I put all my designs, I mean everything will be stolen, and they will claim it's theirs and all that. So people are also extremely fearful, who have a little understanding that if it goes to people's public space, I have no mechanism, there's nothing in my hand then after that. It's something like, usually when you go to a local shop, you are selling something, something control is there, something is there with the people, or even micro entrepreneurs or nano entrepreneurs. This whole platformization, the social media platformization, the job platformization, the service platformization, even the marriage platformization, and so on and so forth, in absolutely, there is a huge amount of things going on. Is there anything, Andriette, I want to come to you, that it looks like that people should do at a level where when we are giving a data, we are given a certificate of, like Netherlands have come with some kind of rule. I think some other countries have some kind of rule where they're saying is that all the artists are requested not to share their data because there is no guarantee after sharing, and we will give you a different kind of. So there is around this AI, because AI is actually multiplying the generation of the data collected. What do you see is that we can go, I mean, from civil society perspective, is to safeguard this one?
Um, it's and I think that, look, there's never just one solution to any big problem, and I think and sometimes problems have residue as well. We know that in the workplace, in the sort of pre-digital industrialization phase, having unions helped protect workers and helped to hold employers accountable. That's very hard in the gig economy because workers are anonymized, and as Vandana says, the platforms are all powerful. It doesn't mean we cannot start, we cannot try. We heard yesterday at the pre-event here in Hyderabad about how gig workers in India, in several states, now have some kind of organization and social protections. That is a start. And I think the challenge, because the digital economy is so globalized, we have to have the inside out, local out. We have to have localization, but we also have to have challenges to the concentration of power at a local level, at a state level, at a country level. And we need government to be part of that. We need regulatory solutions to be part of that. At a global level, we also need regulatory solutions. And I think, Sonia, you talked about a rights-based approach and about individual user responsibility and individual practitioner accountability. I think that's very important. But we have to also challenge the power where it's concentrated. And I think Vandana's analysis, of the power, the precarity, and I think that is so true. I think your analysis is absolutely valid and legitimate. And I think that is why when we are engaged in global human rights processes, global digital policy processes, we have to challenge this notion, because I think there's a myth underpinning all of this. There's the myth of the open, interconnected internet. As being one that also comes with open markets, with no barriers for global investors and global companies. We just have to not buy that Kool-Aid, as they say in the US, because it's not inevitable. Of course, we know that open markets create incentives and create opportunity, but for whom? And I think accountability, I think when you're looking at digitalization and platforms, you cannot just rely on individual awareness raising, the initiatives you're talking about in the Netherlands, for example. That's very important. Making individual artisans more aware of the risks that they take. But you also have to challenge it at the top, where the power is concentrated, by holding those companies accountable, by introducing laws and regulations and checks and balances. The European Union is doing that with their legislation, the Digital Services and Digital Market Regulation. Very difficult. They've got the capacity to try and ensure compliance from the US-based platforms. But there's a lot we can do at a local level. For example, a simple thing that many countries are still not doing. Countries that have sales tax, countries in the global majority, they're not making those global platforms collect and pay sales tax. There are tools in our existing regulatory, public interest-oriented tool basket that we're not yet using effectively or extensively enough to try and get more accountability from these platforms. So I think there's got to be carrots and there's got to be sticks. I think we don't have enough of the stick when it comes to dealing with the platforms. It's not going to transform the entire platform economy, but we can begin to challenge power concentration and introduce more justice. And every little bit of increment in justice will begin to have a ripple effect. But it needs I think, and this is very important, I think it needs governmental participation, it needs national, global, and regional engagement from governments and regulators. And as civil society and practitioners, we have to be part of that. And where there are business actors and entrepreneurs that are willing to take the public interest seriously and commit to it, we also have to get them on our side. But it's a fight, it's a struggle.
Yeah, unfortunately, India has a paradoxical situation. We have as much connected people as we have unconnected people. We have as many people who are dependent on connectivity as many people are not having, and that is where it becomes very difficult to figure out that what kind of regulation we adopt, what kind of systems we adopt, and all that. We are still at a very beginning of the consumer of digital services or digital platform in the very much in the beginning.
It's true, but you've
Yeah.
got to be a citizen first before
Yes,
you are a digital
exactly.
citizen.
But we
And I
are
think
being consumer first. We behave as consumer first. That's also very, very important. So the rest of the three of you, I would like you to say your last few words on this topic, is that so that which can become a lesson that we can follow.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, going back to the points that we were making earlier and what we just heard from Andriette, what makes me think about it, something that we've been working on, which is, first of all, always reminding ourselves that as the digital space is evolving and our demands for it, and we need to demand, I think one of the things that is interesting about talking about power is not just challenging the power, but also understand what power we have as individual citizens, not just because of the rights that we hold and that we want to keep on holding, but how we can exercise that power through our agency, through our participation, our involvement. And, civil society has always had a very important role, right, to represent the voice of those that cannot individually, right, be represented. So it's challenging the power, but also own the power and remember that we can shape how things can be implemented in our societies. And why am I saying these? I hope I'm making myself clear, is that we're talking about all of these concerns, and of course, where do we go with accountability? But where do we start? Do we have the foundations that allow us to even be in a digital world where all of these things are taking shape and we're losing control? I don't think we have those foundations. And so what I would say is, we as a society, countries, communities, regions, etc., we need to remember what do we need to have in place. So Osama, when we talk about meaningful connectivity and we say, okay, you need to have the infrastructure. Yes, but what's the point of infrastructure? What is it going to be used for? How are people going to be protected? And we have to say, well, we need to have frameworks that not only support the right infrastructure, the right quality, but also especially with the data with all of the data concerns that you were mentioning, that there has to be a framework that data is protected. So data governance frameworks are critical. And then what else do we need? How do we go from, creating these possibilities without putting safeguards? We have to always build the safeguards. And that is our responsibility as well. It's the responsibility of governments, but it's also our responsibility as civil society, in private sector, to demand that those foundations are there. And sometimes those foundations are legal, sometimes they're policy, sometimes they are the way we act in our society. Again, I think it's really important to think about duty and responsibility in a rights framework, to understand that, yes, we have the right, but we also have the duty to do things in a specific way. And that, to me, is going back to those foundations. If we don't have those foundations, which give us the safeguards on how a lot can happen, then there's always going to be cracks, right? There's always going to be possibilities of abuse, of violation, of people not being able to benefit exactly the way we would want. And that's a problem.
Can I just ask Sonia a question? But Sonia, I agree with you, but in a way it sounds to me as if you think there's equal power.
No, there isn't.
Oops, sorry. Okay,
of course,
because I think your approach is right, but I think that you have to acknowledge that the power concentration and balances between the users and the platforms
Of course.
are not equivalent.
No, they're not equal at all. But I think this is why we need to have more responsible, be more responsibly active to shape these foundations that we want to have. We can't just leave it to, time to decide. I think part of the concern with a lot of the abuses with data or the biased data that is being used to define AI systems, as you were talking about, Osama, part of it is because, no one is keeping those that are designing these systems accountable to us, to our societies, and we need to come back to that.
Yes, what are you going to write in the next book?
No,
Don't give OTP.
I was really getting interested in what each of you was saying, because I have something to add to all of that. And the reason is that so I have made 9 chapters in my book. Each is an emotion. So there's pleasure, guilt, oppression, freedom, anxiety, anger, courage, isolation. So some reviewer called it the Navarasas of the digital economy. So I wanted to say, as you were speaking, I was thinking of each of those chapters. For example, what you said about acting up again, acting against the platforms and convening together and for your rights, etc. There's a chapter called Courage, in which it was amazing to see, just in India, and I'm not even talking globally, just in India, Uber drivers, gig workers, food delivery workers, how they have come together to, in fact, use technology to beat the platforms. So they are using WhatsApp, they're using Facebook, and it's really ironical because they're using technology, but they're talking about how unfair it was, how my ID got blocked, and how itna commission le liya, ye kiya, ye, mere ko block kar diya. And it's like a space that is very, very angry and energetic and courageous. So they're doing a lot of things which to sort of get their voice heard with the platform. So that was courage. Then I really, what you said, Rajiv ji, really resonated with me, because in this chapter called Isolation, for example, there are examples about how, as a society, we are getting disconnected from shops, our neighborhood shops. Our neighborhood shops are not just places to buy, they are also community hubs. They're places where you meet a neighbor, you talk to that guy, you talk to the vegetable vendor, say kya ho raha hai idhar udhar, something he'll tell you about what's going on in the neighborhood. There's a connection. Now, when you order something on your app through Blinkit, somebody just comes, puts something at your door and runs away. He is running away because he has a next delivery to do. He has pressure, but you have no connection with him. You don't know his name. He doesn't know you. Life just goes on, with disconnected like that. And that idea of isolation, I think we must recognize what we are doing as society. So it's a responsibility we all have. And the funny part is, there's so much we're talking about depression and loneliness. There is depression and loneliness on one hand, and on the other hand, we're not going out and connecting with our own neighborhood. So this is something worth reflecting as a society.
Yeah.
Just add,
Yes, that's
Rama,
your
which is that,
last word.
there is the societal breakdown could happen as a result of this, and I'm scared of that. But two, as a government thing, one, what you mentioned is that it is also important because of what Andriette said is you got to prevent exclusion. So the governments have to act to remove the digital divide. For whatever reason it exists, in terms of the rural population or those who are connected not to. That's the first part of it. But the second part of that would be also to restore some balance of power between the platform and the individuals. And how would you do that? And I think it requires deeper investigation as to what is it that this power, how do they accumulate this power, how do they wield this power, and how are the sort of those who are affected, how can they come together, or can something be done so that this sort of unequal relationship is sort of is just changed. And then the last one is that the governments, I think now, and they tried it, for example, with ONDC, to break the monopoly of externalities that they had, but it's not gone as well as we thought. But can regulation be brought that the data that is collected without the knowledge of the people who it's collected is actually given back to the people to check whether they want this data to be used? Can that mechanism? So as a regulator, I think the government has some very it's a lot of action to be done on their hands as we go forward in the digitization of the society. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, at some point of time, at the moment we are seeing two levels. One is that the power which is collecting all the data and they have all the power. The second who are suffering is the gig workers. But I haven't seen people level, that I don't want to use the app at all. I don't want to. So that is not happening. So that consciousness of being a citizen on a platform is not there. We still are a consumer of a platform, not a citizen-centric consumer on a platform. You are itching to say something?
I'm just itching to say something, yes, because I think you're absolutely right, but I don't think that us stopping to be consumers of apps is the answer. Supermarkets disconnected us from farmers. That's part of economic change. Does that mean farmers don't have rights? That there shouldn't be protections for farmers being paid fairly for their produce? Does that mean that supermarkets shouldn't engage in price fixing? No. I think we will always have economic change, and technological change will drive that. Justice is not, well, I should say injustice is not inevitable. I think by us not using apps, maybe we'll make some kind of impact. That does not change the fact that the producers of those apps, that those platforms should be held accountable. So accountability, I think, is the answer. Not using apps is not necessarily the answer, but being critical consumers and critical producers, as Sonia was also saying, I think that's the answer. But ultimately, you cannot take away the fact that those with the power should be more accountable and should be held more accountable.
Yeah, that's the reason I think the topic says that people, platform, and accountability. So yeah, I mean, thanks for stressing that accountability part has to be increased. We will continue to be, as a citizen, will consumer. We may keep changing platform, but the platforms have to be accountable. I'll stop this session, and thank you for the audience for listening.